What was it like growing up with Frank Zappa as a father? Was it wild? Yes, but not maybe in the way you think. So my dad was essentially my soulmate. He was my favorite person in the world. And yet he was quite rejecting, not from meanness, but from busyness and from enjoying his own expression. So his first love was his work, maybe second love, blowjobs from strangers. Third, third love, the studio. I'm joking, but it's also not.
I'm Justin J, and this is The Plug. Nearly everyone harbors some sort of unresolved family issues or painful childhood memories. But imagine if those childhood traumas unfolded amidst the whirlwind of rock star excess, fame, and a wildly unconventional parenting philosophy. The term Nepo baby is often used to describe someone who's capitalized on their parents' fame for undeserved success. But today's guest had a very different experience. After years of yearning for more quality time with her father, who was either constantly on tour or immersed in their home recording studio, she pitched the idea of collaborating on a song with her dad when she was just 14 years old. Her goal wasn't to chase fame or to even have a career in the music industry. It was simply a strategy to try and spend more time with her dad. But when the song became an unexpected smash hit, she was suddenly thrust into the public eye. In her new book, Earth to Moon, she tells a remarkably personal and candid account of her experience growing up with a rock star father. So how do you reconcile the immense pride and respect you hold for your father's musical legacy with the lingering resentment from a childhood marked with manipulation, deceit, and disappointment? We'll find out as we sit down for a chat with the artist who helped bring grody to the max into the cultural lexicon. Today, author, actress, entrepreneur, and the iconic voice behind the generation-defining hit song, Valley Girl, Miss Moon Unit Zappa. Okay, we're up and running. You got everything you need?
More or less.
More or less? Okay. Moon Zappa, thank you for sitting down. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you. I really appreciate you taking time out.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, let's get right into it. Earth to Moon, your new book, available now. First off, I just want to say congratulations on such a wonderful book. It's a really personal and intimate account of a really kind of extraordinary and at times dysfunctional household. And I'm a little bit younger than you, but my parents were born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, and I grew up there until I was about 9. So there was a lot of just details in this book that really resonated and I found really fun to read. I mean, just even references to shopping at Pick and Save or eating at Sambo's or Elvira or, Busch Gardens. And so it was really fun, but it's a really heartfelt and compelling book. So, congratulations.
Thank you so much for your very kind words. I worked my ass off on this thing, and I'm really proud of it. So,
well, you described the monotony of doing interviews after Valley Girl came out, and and how so many of these journalists either didn't do the research or they actually thought that they were the first person to ask these redundant kind of boilerplate questions. So I'll promise you that I did in fact read your book cover to cover. And I also promise that I will not ask you to do the Valley Girl voice. So.
That's great. My favorite Valley Girl at the moment is the woman, I can't remember the actress's name, but she's on Schitt's Creek.
Oh, yeah.
She's my favorite Val. My current Val.
Is that song still a thorn in your side? Have you learned to embrace it? What's your relationship with that song today?
It was always something that was between me and my father. And my father's songs are essentially, for me, time machines. I go back to where I was in the home or what was happening in his world at the time that he wrote it. I do believe that you get smarter listening to my father's music. But as far as that song goes, it really was basically a moment in time with spending time with my dad. And then what came after was really for the world, for the public. So I I do think it's funny that it still does seem to be affecting people and it has a fresh life. I've seen a few people have sent me versions of the song, like snippets from TikToks, and I think it's funny. It was a character that I did that seems to still have meaning for people. But essentially, I was just parroting the voices I heard locally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's such a great description in the book talking about doing press for that song and how it felt when you did these interviews, that it was almost like you were in a play and you were saying these lines from a character over and over. And then each night they would just recast the journalist. And it's such a great description of what that must feel like, having the public feel like they know you, or at least a manufactured part of you, and what a strange byproduct of fame that is. And I know you talked a lot about how Justine Bateman's a good friend of yours, and she wrote a wonderful book about just that a few years ago about
It's
fame.
incredible. It's an unbelievable book. Yeah.
Are your relationships with fame similar? Do you guys talk about that? Are yours a little darker, or was she a big part of this book when you were kind of doing research?
I'll tell you a funny story. Justine and I took a walk a couple of years ago, and somebody whistled at us, like a construction guy. And he was, I don't know, probably in his late 40s. And Justine just kept walking, and I kind of raised a hand and said, hi. And then he shouted, bitches, because he didn't get the response that he wanted. And I shouted back, I said hi. And Justine turned to me and goes, did you want to talk to that person? No. Do you know that person? No. Then what are you doing? And I was like, oh, right. I have a say in my own experiences. She's willing to deal with the consequences of her actions or non-actions. And I was still doing good girl for some yelling construction guy. And it was hilarious and ridiculous. And she's just constantly a teacher for me, just unwinding the conditioning, the deep conditioning that's there.
So, I mean, I feel like for huge Frank Zappa fans, this is a really interesting book because on one hand, it's obviously a very intimate and behind the scenes look at his private life, but you're also very candid about his shortcomings. And there's a lot of kind of resentment and bitterness that percolates up in this book, but that's not the overall theme. Like, it's actually a very uplifting and heartfelt story. And I'm wondering, was that something that was conscious when you sat down to write this book? Because there's so many aggrieved tell-all books by celebrity offspring, from Mommy Dearest et al. And this is not that book. I mean, is that something that you consciously chose to avoid, or is this really just an honest reflection of how you've learned to accept your childhood?
Oh, believe me, I wrote the 148,000 word just rage attack version, and then I tempered it. I mean, I tried to write it honestly like a police report, just the facts, ma'am, and just let the reader have the experience of being plopped into that house and put to bed. What was it like growing up with Frank Zappa as a father? Was it wild? Yes, but not maybe in the way you think. The other piece of it was that when a father, so my dad was essentially my soulmate. He was my favorite person in the world, and yet he was quite rejecting, not from meanness, but from busyness and from enjoying his own expression. And his first love was his work, maybe second love, blowjobs from strangers. Third love, the studio. I'm joking, but it's also not. But the thing,
not really, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing about it is that when a dad really loves a daughter, because I had no, there were no complications between he and I. So when a dad really loves a daughter, almost more than he loves his partner, his wife, it triangulates the mother and the daughter relationship, and it creates tension and a complexity there. And then as a daughter, I both loved and hated my father for the positionality. Do you know what I mean? So kind of talking about all these complicated paradoxes, I really had to keep the writing pretty. I mean, I tried my best to keep it simple and not have resentment. To just try to say this is what it was like.
I mean, the interesting dynamic of your mother Gail having to compete with you for your father's attention, and that triangle that you just described. Did you understand that as a kid, or was it just you didn't understand why you couldn't get the support from your mom and dad like a traditional family?
I just felt it in my stomach, in my heart, in my body. I just felt these things. I maybe I couldn't name it as triangulation, but I could name it as, hey, he's paying more attention to, like, I could see it in terms of like levels, more or less. I think we all can do this.
Yeah.
We can feel something's off. You can certainly tell when something is feeling good, and if it's not, then something's off.
Because throughout this book, you really describe a chaotic, kind of full throttle, unconventional household. Everything from the swearing, how your parents felt that there was no such thing as dirty words, only vulgar thoughts, or the, relative exposure to nudity and sexuality in the house, or how you only called your mom and dad Gail and Frank. And, it's not too far into this book that I started to realize that, you calling your parents by your first name, it's not just part and parcel to a progressive household, that there's something much deeper going on. And, literally, it's till the final pages of this book where the word mom is actually written on the page. And in a way that kind of gets to the heart of what this book is really about. I mean, could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for noticing that. It's when your first bully is your mother, and she doesn't want you to call her mom. You get very early on, there is no mother here. There's not going to be somebody bringing you soup when you're sick or comforting you when you're sad about something. It was almost like waking up in a not a corporation exactly, but something that has the feeling of all of the warmth of a dentist's waiting room.
Speak a little bit about the reason behind not calling your mom and dad.
I didn't, that wasn't my rule, but we were introduced to our parents that way. There was no, it was just, this is Gail, this is Frank. There was no, so that was an immediate difference between me and my peers. They had moms and dads, and I had a Frank and a Gail. And I think the idea for them was insta maturity, or you're just a smaller, underdeveloped version of a bigger thing, which is too much for a kid to grasp. They were already living like, in some ways, we were peers with no power. And so that was extremely confusing, oppressive, and bizarre. Just it's just not an easy dynamic.
At the time, did it seem normal that you called your parents by their first names and maybe your friends had moms and dads, or is that not something that really resonated until you were an adult?
I don't know that I was thinking that it was normal. I was thinking or not normal. I was thinking I just don't like this. I mean, I think what I think is weird is that so early on, I was like, this is not for me. Is there another alternative? That's so weird to me that I was a kid going, okay, time out. No. Can we round the whole thing up and have a chat about it? And can we come up with another plan that's a side plan for the person that doesn't want to do it the way you're doing it? I think that's, and maybe there are a lot of people that feel like the fish out of water in their family, but to feel like a fish out of water in your own family and then a fish out of water in society because of who your dad is, because he's a needle mover and he's a kind of a target. That's it, again, it's just a lot of things to juggle, more than usual.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of themes that were really prevalent in this book. I mean, obviously, deception and betrayal, but also there was, I think, what was most heartbreaking for me to read about is just the longing, and the irony of you living in such relative close proximity to this person that everybody wanted a piece of, but you felt like you really didn't have a piece of either. And, all you really wanted was his undivided attention and love and support. And there was such a heartbreaking story, you talking about how all you really wanted from your dad is just to have his undivided attention in bed, cuddling for a morning. And that just seems like such a simple and sad thing to not get.
It's crazy. It's unimaginable to me, especially as a parent. Now, part of my healing was getting to parent my kid the way I wasn't parented. My kid has plenty of complaints about me, but not the complaints I have about my experience growing up. Because we're all allowed to make mistakes and we're all entitled to the dignity of our choices. And yet I'm not a fan of some people's choices. I just think it's hard for me to hear the word genius and not think, oh, what was culled or lost or who got the short end of that journey. I'm not really impressed by what I guess maybe society finds impressive. Again, I asked, what is the price of genius? What if there's this much collateral damage? And I really respect people who know how to take care of their family first and also work. And it's not easy to do that, but it's lazy to just do your own thing. To me, genius or laziness? I don't know.
I mean, in the end, do you attribute the unfulfilled attention from your dad? Is that strictly because of work, or do you think there was really something deeper going on there? I mean, because people are busy and they find time for their kids in different ways.
To me, it's inexcusable. To me, it's inexcusable to not make sure your kids have a chance to thrive, that you reflect their interests. I remember when I started therapy, they were talking about a developmental stage called object constancy, which is where a baby is supposed to, parents stay put and the baby crawls away and maybe goes around a corner where they can't see the parents and then crawls back, and the parents have to stay in place so that the baby learns that the world is safe to explore. I don't lose anything by exploring. And I didn't get object constancy. I got objects constantly instead. And just things to distract myself, the way a lot of kids are handed an iPad as a newborn. You could say access to everything, or you could say no edges to find yourself or to be held in complication. I mean, a lot of adults can't handle complexity. Why would you expect that of a baby?
So, I mean, I think one of the hallmarks of a very talented writer, and you really enjoyed this book, is that the ability to tell stories about things that at face value might seem simple and insignificant, but they have like a really deeper meaning. And there are several stories that you wrote about that I found so tragic. I mean, they all seem to be around you kind of being deceived and then ultimately disappointed. And there was this story where your dad took you to New York City to see Cats, and you got to go backstage. And at face value, it seemed like a very generous father-daughter thing to do. But it turns out that he was having an affair with one of the cast members, and you end up spending the night without him in a hotel room, or he invites you to go on tour when Valley Girl comes out, which he'd never done before, and then kind of coerces you to play the song on stage. And then your mom tells you afterwards that it was because they could write off the travel expenses if you were there. I mean, those are tragic stories. What did you get out of sharing them with the world?
That's an interesting question. Well, first of all, I'm not sure if he was with one of the Cats people. I don't know who he was with. It could have been any number of people. It was just the fact that there was this event, and then he was whatever.
The sentiment is it wasn't about you. Ultimately.
It wasn't about me ultimately. And I think the reason why I shared those stories is because I don't know, there's something about being witnessed in saying something out loud and hoping that there's somebody else who feels those same feelings as a daughter, as a woman, as a human, I mean, on the days when I feel lost, I think, oh my gosh, I have so many advantages. If I'm still feeling befuddled, then what's somebody with far less resources experiencing? And so I was saved by books, by movies, by TV, by music. And so I think you have to do your part in helping somebody else put words to something that's an obstacle in their psyche.
So it's you almost see this book as an act, not just as a cathartic act for yourself, but as like kind of an act of generosity for other people that kind of went through some similar experiences.
Definitely. I think we have to help raise each other both into real adults, but also uplift one another. I love that Swedish proverb, sorrows halved and joys doubled. And I think that goes for your family, and that goes for your community, and that goes for the world. Also, you have to figure out what it is that is your magic. What's your gift? What's your contribution? And really do that. And if you're somebody who's good with words, then do a word thing. If you're somebody who can play an instrument or cook a yummy meal, then serve the way your gifts want to be expressed.
And at what point in your life did you realize that that was your gift? Because you kind of, I think most people probably know you from this kind of accidental hit song, Valley Girl, but it turns out that really, as far as I see, wasn't really your calling, despite your dad's talent.
Yeah, music is something. I mean, even in the music, I was improvising and doing a character, and I was playing with language and playing with storytelling. And I don't think it was until I got into an acting class with Roy London, which I talk about in the book, that I really understood that I had some other abilities. And then he just noticed that I was just endlessly taking notes. And you could say it's graphomania, or you could say, oh, there's somebody who's listening and trying to make sense of what's being said. And I do feel like an interpreter from English to English, but...
It's a very analytical approach to something that's very kind of emotional and ethereal.
Yeah, and I have to work really hard to stay in my body and not just be a head that's just thinking and thinking. I love when I can do physical things and give the mind a rest.
So another thing that kept coming up in this book is this concept of trust, and how that was instilled so much by your parents into you guys. Like on a literal level, like you really weren't supposed to bring outsiders into the house, which there might be a legitimate concern for that. Your dad's famous and whatnot. But on a much more deep level, they really instilled in you that, your family are the only people that you can trust. You guys are a unit. I mean, it's literally in your name. And then you start to achieve some success with Valley Girl and have, your own life. And the only positive reinforcement that you get comes from outside the house. And all of the conflict and the pain and the injustice surrounding money that you eventually end up with publishing rights and all that, those come from inside the house. I mean, I assume that irony was not lost on you.
Yeah, it's confusing when people outside of your family are nicer to you than the people on the inside, and to have a family version of myself, a public version of myself, and then a deep interior version of myself that I again with my Justine story, I'm still developing that, the safety to even. If a little of my anger makes you attack me, well, what's a lot of my anger going to do? Or if a little of my creativity makes you jealous and want to, I don't know, do what you do with jealousy, then what are you going to do with the full weight of my expression? It takes a while to build that courage up. Fall down 7 times, stand up 8 isn't always easy when you've really had the shit kicked out of you 7 times.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like you did that with your book. I mean, I don't know what more revealing and honest in exhibiting faith and trust in the public could you do than to write this book? I mean, it's very honest.
Well, we'll see how people react to it. I appreciate your reaction, but
thank you.
We'll see how people take it.
I mean, well, you talked about your dad getting blowjobs. I mean, you're very blunt about your dad's affairs in this book, and the way that your mom and dad manipulated each other, and how these kind of mind games had collateral damage on you and your siblings. There's like another really heartbreaking story as you were in your teens and you had pimples and, kind of you're just like a young teenager, and your dad's mistress sends you this European pimple cream. And on one hand, it was like a sweet gesture because you took it as he actually took the time to talk about you to her so she could send you this gift. But you also knew that out of solidarity to your mom, you absolutely had to throw it out. I mean, that is a lot for a young teen. I mean, did you have to unlearn and unnormalize that type of behavior in your adult relationships? I mean, how do you go beyond that?
Oof. I mean, I think I just got a really early glimpse at the worst of humanity. I just got a really heightened taste of again, complex dynamics, because when I received that box from my father's, we'll say mistress, I might say whore, but of course, the other piece of it was I desperately needed help with my skin. And I could also feel maybe there was some manipulation in this woman trying to insert herself as somebody I could also lean on, which it was dividing a wedge between Gail and myself. And then also, was it her trying to remind my father that she was still around? There were so many
levels of manipulation,
levels and layers of manipulation, and I felt all of them. They were all, and I really do believe we all have this ability to know what everybody is up to, but we have so many denial structures in place, or we don't want to deal with what the consequences of the fallout might be if we say, hey, stop this, or why is she doing this, or whatever, to just actually address what's the discomfort. There wasn't a safe space for me to say any of this stuff at that time.
Did you have to consciously learn to not perpetrate that type of behavior and hurt on your family and your adult relationships? I mean, I'm curious how you ended up not emulating behavior like that.
Oh, well, I believe me, there's stuff that didn't get in the book about my terrible choices, more of my terrible choices. I left enough of my terrible choices in the book to hopefully satisfy the reader. But yeah, I mean, I learned from failing. I learned from experiencing something going, that wasn't it. So yes, I've made many blunders in my own life that kept me on the path of better choices. I mean,
is there an analogy with, let's say, children of people with addiction issues either tend to fall into addiction themselves or have zero tolerance and don't touch it at all? Is there an element of that? Just this behavior was so over the top that you knew that you didn't want to be like them as a parent?
Well, we all of the kids in the house became serial monogamists, for example. And it's frustrating when you're either moving towards or away from what you experience instead of towards your natural inclinations. When you come from dysfunction or trauma, you don't really get to access your imagination until you do a lot of work on yourself, because you're just in survival mode. And so you don't get to daydream and kind of imagine who you might be with support. For example, it just never occurred to me to drink or use drugs because it was so ingrained in us to not do those things. My father was a role model for, he wanted no obstructions in his mind. He wanted the pure version of his expression. And there was no way he was going to dull it or blunt it or diffuse it. And so these kinds of ideas became exemplary and important. And plus, if people are getting LLCs in your name, which they do with my name, they start businesses and call it Moon Unit. They have children they rename, or pets that they call Moon Unit, or they have a lighting company or a stud llama. Google Moon Unit sometime. You'll be like, oh, what am I up to? But the point of that is to say that I never wanted to disappoint the larger community. And I didn't even give myself a chance to, maybe I am a derelict drug addict, cheater. I'll never know, because I didn't. I didn't pursue those paths. But so in some ways, the responsibility to the external world also kept me on the straight and narrow. But I don't know why some people just go, I'm not going to pay attention to what the world expects of me. I'm just going to do my own thing. I find that equally bizarre.
Wow. Well, I mean, in the introduction to this book, you wrote in your journal how you thought you'd never be as good as your dad. But then you also described like a very flawed father and maybe a flawed human as well. Like, how did you kind of reconcile these two really conflicting facts, like growing up or as an adult?
Well, I think I'm still trying to reconcile those ideas because a lot of the positive attributes of my father, strong work ethic, walking your talk, speaking for the larger community, getting people to vote, making people aware of their civic duties, following your expression as purely as it wants to be expressed, which is such a intimate human experience to really just let things come out the way they come out. These are things I can still appreciate, but some of the stuff is our societal constructs that kind of have a collective hallucinative quality to them. For example, fame. That is nothing to aspire to, as far as I'm concerned. I think at the root of the pursuit of fame, for example, is a desire to matter. And if you didn't matter at home, yeah, you're going to try to matter in the world. Or if you mattered in your home, you're going to be like, I matter all the time. But so to find that balance, but I think it's a good foundation if you can matter to the people that matter to you. That's to me a far better start, because then you can decide, well, maybe your talent is just I don't know, making croissants. So then, do you have to be the most famous croissant maker, or can you just make those bad boys
and get enjoyment out of it? Yeah.
Right. Can you be a small business owner instead?
I mean, I thought another section of the book that I really enjoyed was the way you described the anxiety of being in your early teens, but having to be in these high profile situations, whether it's like interviews or, media appearances. And at one point you get your portrait taken by Bruce Weber, and you feel so just like pimply and insecure and embarrassed. And you look back on that photo as an adult, and you have such a different perspective. And that really resonated with me, because I know we all have these memories of how we think we looked in an awkward point in our life, but not all of us have these documents to be able to kind of look back and disprove these kind of false memories that we have. And in a way, you're really fortunate to have those. And I was wondering, did you look back at a lot of interviews of yourself when you were doing research for this book? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I did. I relied on friends, and I would ask them, what are some stories I've told you that either really made you laugh or made you feel something? I did go back and watch old interviews. I had a lot of empathy for myself, because in the David Letterman interview, for example, I just look like I'm trying to pretend to be an adult, and I'm just trying to not embarrass my dad and keep it together. And the feedback I got was, oh, you held your own, you were so poised, or whatever the praise was. And that's not how I experienced it. And then the Howard Stern interview, when I went back and watched that, I just thought, this is horrendous. Two very public men just taking shots at this young woman in the weirdest ways, but okay. And yet Howard Stern kind of lays out the troubles I don't see coming about my path that's been kind of set up. And
so it's like inappropriate and kind of prophetic at the same time.
Exactly. I would love to sit down and have a chat with him about that all these years later. And I remember when I did the show, I was like, it's good you have daughters. We will meet again.
Yeah. But I mean, I just think it's so cool. You look back on that Bruce Weber photo, and it's like, you actually weren't that pimply and ugly and gangly looking. You were just young and impressionable, and so much of your memory of that was tainted by the moment and not the actual facts.
I think because I felt so unsafe all the time, it was just easy for me to imagine everybody was attacking me. Again, if your mother's your first bully, how do you think the world is going to treat you? And so I just didn't ever have the sense I was in good hands. And now it's something I look for. Instead of looking for red flags, I look for, as they say, green flags. Instead of moving towards chaos, I try to move towards people that also enjoy rigorous honesty and playing the adult version of Where's Waldo, which is spot the conditioning.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say, if you take a red flag and wrap it around your shoulders, you have a red cape. I don't even know what that means.
I guess it applies to a green one as well. But
yeah. I want to talk about so in the third act of this book, both of your parents pass away. And I found it really interesting how they seem to both handle it really differently. And, with your mom, it seemed like in her final moments, she kind of took it as an opportunity, if not to reconcile, at least to recognize that, hey, maybe you didn't have the most functional upbringing. And maybe there might be a little bit of culpability. Like, even if she didn't explicitly mention it, that was my impression from the way you wrote it. Whereas it seemed like your dad took the opportunity to almost use death as an excuse to continue to shy away from the conversation that you really wanted to have. I mean, he literally says, like, I can't have this tender moment right now. I'm sick. I'm dying. And I'm wondering, do you feel like in the end, did you ever get that proverbial morning in bed with your dad? I mean, did you have a resolution with him?
Yeah, I mean, in the book I talk about, I had no idea that you could die before you die and live on in your death. So Frank was die before you die, and Gail was live on past your expiration date. And with Gail, when she essentially asked for my forgiveness, the real horror there for me that's ongoing is that it's better now, but is that she didn't tell me the whole truth of what she was asking forgiveness for. And so I was blindsided by the post-mortem betrayal that just rocked my world and made me have to take everything down to the studs and be like, what is a family? What is love? What are siblings? What does it mean to be a person? Why did they bring me into this world? All those questions.
And that has to do with how the publishing and the assets were distributed?
Yeah, but more that my mother essentially said, I wish these two children well, but not these other two well. I wish these two well forever and not these other two forever. And how do you choose two children over other children? Like, it's evil stepmother behavior in fairy tales. It was bizarre. But also what she robbed me of was the ability to appreciate what she did give and the ability to grieve the loss of her. She robbed me of the chance to love her. And that is so sad. Whereas my father, I just had to say, well, that's who he was. He was who he was till the end. I mean, essentially they were both who they were to the end, except I didn't know who Gail really was until she died. My dad, I was like, okay, that tracks.
He was consistent.
Gail,
he was on brand until the very end.
Yeah, and really, when I take a macro look, Gail was also on brand. I just didn't see it coming. For example, we grew up with estrangement in the family. They had estrangement in their, Gail didn't talk to some of her siblings. Frank didn't talk to some of his, but I just never thought it would happen to me. But it was there all the time, so it technically was on brand. I foolishly, I believe the words.
The description of your family as a corporation seems really apt, whereas because how do you love two children more than the other? But with a corporation, sometimes there's underperforming assets that you get rid of. It's like it's much more, emotionally distanced.
Yeah, but I mean, take that example. Her metrics for underperforming were shitty and inaccurate. So And that's a bad corporation too, if you don't look at what everybody's talents are and then put them in the right spots. Do you know what I mean? Some companies seem to be doing fine. They make money and they love their employees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't want to make this book sound like it's nothing but deep, heavy, tragic stories about your family, because it's actually a really fun read. And for the listeners, there's actually some degree of juice and gossip in this book as well. You have great stories about Woody Harrelson and Emilio Estevez and an unnamed heavy metal drummer who I won't put you on blast, but is it common knowledge who that is? I wasn't able to unravel it.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
But it's a really wonderful story, and I hope this isn't awkward because we don't know each other very well. But I'm really proud of you for writing this. It seems like a very it meant a lot to you, and it really reads on the page. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I hope that people find some of the stories funny because they are a lot of them are hilarious and bizarre. I mean, that's the weird thing about my life is that maybe we all have to, have a first awkward sexual experience, but when there are celebrities involved, it's like a weird play again, where the cast is like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that. It plays differently when it's that actor in the role of awkward leader.
Well, I like how you were able to call out Eric Estrada in this book, at least. So that was a great scene.
Yep, my accidental first kiss.
Big up to Chips fans. Well, we always like to end the podcast by asking the guests to plug something that they're not directly involved in, but that they feel maybe isn't getting enough attention, whether it's a book, a movie, a film, a social cause, a food. Is there something that you're really loving lately that you want to give a little shine to?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, empathy would be, I would probably go with qualities. I would say empathy isn't being utilized as much as it could. Marshall Rosenberg's work is amazing for understanding empathy. There's an underwear company, Tush and Bush, that they make some nice underpants.
That's a huge spectrum of examples you just gave.
Also, my tea company. I have a tea company nobody knows about, which you can order on my moonunit.com site. Also, bread knives. Those are. I'm a big fan of bread knives. The one that Anthony Bourdain recommends in his book, Kitchen Confidential. I can't remember the company, but I highly recommend that bread knife. Always the music of Fiona Apple, the comedy of Maria Bamford, I guess. There's a few.
I wanted to ask you real quick too. Talk to me about your connection to comedy. I thought that was a really interesting chapter in the book, how you kind of fell into the comedy circle. We've had a lot of comics on here. I'm like a big fan. Like, what's your current connection? Do you still have a love for that?
I live for comedy. One of the things that I besides storytelling and trying to master storytelling and reading everything I can about storytelling and talking to everyone I can about storytelling, comedy is the other thing that fascinates me. I love dissecting each comic style, what their humor flavor is, how they approach it. Yes, and is my religion. I think it should be everybody's religion, which is accepting reality and then making it more fun and doubling down on. In a comedy setting, you raise stakes so that you're laughing more, and I think that that's a great way to live life as well.
And it speaks to generosity and
listening,
collaboration as well,
and play.
Yeah.
And I see a ton of live comedy. When I was performing comedy, going back to your original questions, like the idea of just hearing my material as the constant and the audience is the thing that changes. That was intolerable to me. You were talking about journalism and how it was like you just kept recasting the journalists, and that's how I talk about it in the book. And recasting the audience, that style of performing wasn't interesting to me. I appreciate theater because you're trying to make your compatriots laugh, even though you've been with each other for a million years. But what I enjoy about performing comedy is just writing something that is specific to literally the physical space. I love to make up songs on the spot. That's definitely from my dad. But yeah, comedy is king.
Great. Well, I just want to say congrats once again. Let's get the plug in one more time. Earth to Moon, available now. Go check it out. It's a heartfelt story. It has some heavy material, but it's not a heavy book. It's actually it's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, hopefully our paths will cross soon. And thanks so much for taking the time out.
Yeah. Yeah. See you in the city.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio, logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com, and you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.